Now, with opinion polls still suggesting that the Conservatives are in for an absolute drubbing in the general election this week, more than a few are asking whether they made a big mistake back in September of 2022 when they removed Boris Johnson, who won that big majority in 2019. Now, to help us answer this, let's have a chat with the award-winning social entrepreneur and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Samuel Kasumu. Good evening, Samuel. Thank you very much for your time. Do you actually pinpoint the Conservatives? I know that the polls would actually suggest that when you look at them laid out on a timeline, but do you pinpoint the Conservatives' decline on that very point, on that point of getting rid of a Prime Minister that won that majority?
Well, good evening, Darren, and good evening to everybody. Thanks for having me. I think the context of when my former boss left is very important. Of course, we had the drama around Partygate. There was quite a high turnover of advisors during that period. We were still trying to transition out of a pandemic. And so it was, or is understandable to appreciate that some of his colleagues may have panicked. But ultimately, we were 4 or 5 points behind in the polls. This was during the midterm period. There was absolutely no way in hindsight that any of those Conservative members of Parliament who decided to remove Boris Johnson would have made the same decision if they knew what would come after him, which has been an absolute shocking chain of events, bluntly.
And it's been the greatest blessing for the Labour Party, I should say. And Samuel, I want to ask you about your book, The Power of the Outsider, because I want to ask as well, off the back of that, do you think that's what the Conservative Party needs now? Because well, I don't think they're going to have much chance to get an insider, given the amount of people that are going to lose their seats if the polls are correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are going to be some challenges for the Conservative. Well, there are some challenges now, but certainly some new challenges after next Thursday. We don't know which members of Parliament are going to still be there. We don't know which of the current potential new intake will be successful in being elected. But no matter what the composition of the Conservative parliamentarians are come July the 4th, it's going to be very, very, very difficult for them to find a way within the next 4 to 5 years to have a coherent strategy offer for the British people who bluntly view our brand right now as toxic and are very disappointed with how we've chucked away a very significant 80 majority in 2019.
Yeah.
Samuel, you know a lot of the key players in the Conservative Party. You work with them very closely when you worked at Number 10. You know Priti, you know Kemi, you know Robert Jenrick. You know all the runners and riders who might be the next Tory leader if Rishi Sunak loses as expected next Thursday. Who do you think would be best to take on the job?
Oh, gosh, that is a very difficult question to answer. I think the Conservative Party is a broad church, and some people would argue that that's part of the challenge that we have today, and that there are people who are maybe more aligned with reform, and some folks who people might feel got lost on the way to joining a union and somehow have ended up in the Conservative Party, right? But I think if you look at the Labour Party today, they would argue that they're also a relatively broad church, and so it does come back to leadership. And so the question for me is, who in the next 5 years can command the respect of their peers, regardless of where they might locate themselves ideologically within the Conservative family? And that will take someone who, number one, is experienced, somebody that perhaps has led a great office of state. Number two, somebody that is maybe not too tarnished by the events over the last two years. And number three, somebody that is willing to reach out to folks that might not naturally agree with them. And when I look at the folks that might be left after next Thursday, I think that is only probably 1 or 2 people who could. Oh gosh, you're going to make me say a name?
Yeah.
No, I think there are a number of people. I think Priti Patel was an interesting candidate. She's been a Home Secretary, I would say a relatively successful Home Secretary. people would probably locate her towards the right of the party, but I know that there are moderates who hold her in very high regard. And again, I don't think she's been tarnished by the events over the last 2 years. For me, I would say she's probably the dark horse here. Also, I think in 4 or 5 years' time, immigration will still be a very significant subject for the public. I don't think Keir Starmer is going to stop the boats. In fact, I don't think he has a plan to stop the boats.
Well,
I don't think. I think migration will reduce, but only because of the things that are already in train to happen. And so I think someone like Priti will have the credibility to ask the tough questions, to hold Keir to account. So I think she's probably, on balance, the one to beat.
Samuel, I want to bring in Alexander Armstrong because he actually left the Conservative Party quite recently. And Alex, I wonder, would you have stayed, do you think, if Boris was still leading the party?
Well, my problem with Boris was that he actually wasn't as conservative as he tried to make himself out to be. He was actually far more on the Liberal side, far on the higher tax end of things too. And I wonder, Samuel, and the net zero madness as well, which was obviously his policies. How do you think the public would respond to him today, given that these policies are perhaps the reason why people like me have left the Conservative Party? I used to be of the thought that the Tories would trounce it with Boris, and I think there's name recognition. But do you think the message still would hold true without Brexit?
Yeah, but if you mean in terms of winning an election, which is a slightly different objective. So to win an election, you need to be able to hold on to your core vote, but also you need to be able to reach out to folks who might not be your natural bedfellows. And so in 2019, when we won, there was a very clear slogan, get Brexit done. And what people often forget is that it wasn't just folks who voted to leave the European Union that wanted to get it done. It was, most of the public were tired of the debate and the drama that was happening in the House of Commons at the time. And so we were able to reach out to also folks in the Red Wall who may have or may not have voted to leave the European Union, but were captivated by what Boris, as a great campaigner, could offer. And of course, there was a big difference between winning an election. So if your question's around, could Boris win an election in 4 or 5 years' time, the answer is absolutely yes. But the separate point is then, based on some of the things that he's very passionate about, would he be able to inspire natural Conservatives to feel like his project is what they could align themselves with? I think that's a slightly separate point. The problem with Boris Johnson is when he's not in charge, he'll write really interesting things for the Telegraph or the Mail or whatever. Yeah. And then when he then has power, whether that be as a mayor of London or as a prime minister, you probably tend to get a slightly more liberal, progressive character.
Samuel, do you think that the Conservatives will be calm enough after this supposed car crash next week to not replace the leader too quickly? Because I wonder if replacing the leader too quickly means that they won't have time for introspection and looking at where they went wrong. They need to stay with Rishi for a while, be able to self-critique before they then decide who's the right person to take them to the right place.
Yeah, I've heard people speak about that as an option, but I don't know what the rules are within the Constitution, and the folks who hold the power tend to change the rules to suit themselves. So we'll have to see what they decide to do in the coming weeks. I think the bigger challenge is, as you say, there is a need for some introspection. There's a need to reflect on how we got to this moment, and can that happen within 2 or 3 months? Including a summer where everybody's going to want to get away from Westminster for a while, for understandably so. And then you come back in September, and then you have party conference, and then you have a leader. That does feel very quick to me, but I don't know what the rules are. And to be honest, for me, the most important thing is who is the leader that comes next. And what we don't need is somebody who doesn't have experience, who's going to promise the world and underdeliver. I really, really do think what we need, after this shocking result that we're going to get on Thursday, is somebody with some experience, some respect that can steady the ship for the next 4 or 5 years.
And
that's what I hope we get. I'm not sure.
That would be nice,
and of course, and the Conservative.
All right, Samuel Kasumu, thank you very much for your insight there into that issue. Now, Benjamin Butterworth, do you fear Priti Patel?
No, I think if I were a Conservative, if you asked me to put a bet on, which isn't very fashionable in politics at the moment, my bet would be that Priti Patel will be the next Conservative Party leader.
Interesting.
And I think she will win it quite clearly. I think I get the impression that what that former advisor was talking about when he said we don't want someone who promises a lot and is inexperienced, I think that's a criticism of Kemi Badenoch. I think Suella Braverman is chaotic and unreliable, and she was the person who let all the immigrants in, which she claims to have a problem with. So I think she will not get very far. I think Priti Patel would be their best choice.
Does anyone on the panel think that anyone actually cares? Do you think everyone's just checked out and sort of thinks, I actually don't care what happens to the Conservative Party?
I also completely disagree with Benjamin. I think it's going to be a Liberal one nation Tory, because that's who's going to be left. Right, and who's going to vote for a right winger when the rest of them are left leaning?
Yeah. But hang on, where Farage steps in.
Absolutely.
There is no question after Nigel Farage's stance on Putin, Russia and Ukraine, all of the allegations of racism against campaigners and candidates in the Reform Party, that there will ever be a merger of the Conservatives and the Reform Party.
Well, I guess the Conservative Party will have to die then, won't it?
Okay.
None at all.
Enough talk. It's time for us to put our heads on the chopping block, because we're going to write down our predictions for the vote share right now, and then they'll be unveiled next week, and we'll let you know at home how we all actually got on. Albie, you're supervising this. He's got his magic box.
Yes, I am. We've all got a box here, gentlemen, and
Sparkly
you
box.
all have envelopes in front of you with names of the parties: Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem, Reform, the Green Party, SNP and Plaid Cymru. And we're going to write down our predictions on how many seats they'll win. And next week, we're going to see who is the winner.
Okie doke.
But
It's a great test of my maths, because it has to add up to 632.
Roughly. Maybe do it to the nearest 10.
Should we massage the figures?
Well, that expensive school didn't do much good, did it?
My school was free. You all paid for it.
Dr. Renee, who are you betting on to win the election, and what's your sort of prediction of the outcome?
So I am predicting a hung parliament.
Interesting.
Which I know is a bit out there right now and against all of the polls. I'm not convinced by the polls. I think there's a massive dissatisfaction amongst people, and I think we're going to see that next week. It's going to be a shock.
Do you know what? I'm of a similar mind. I think the polls can't be as wrong as they are, but we have seen it before. I think there is going to be a Labour majority, a substantial one, but I think it's the Tories that are going to get really trounced. I really don't know anyone who's still got confidence in voting for them. It's a shame, because I do think there are some fantastic Tory MPs that I would put my cross next to on the ballot if they were my MP. But I suspect Reform will actually outperform what the polls say. I really do believe that. I also believe that Labour are going to really trounce the Tories, and that the Tories will be gone in Scotland completely.